Today's guest is Dave Kanter. He's a web and mobile designer with tons of experience. He has worked for Adobe. He worked for LucasArts Digital on StarWars.com. He worked at Autodesk. He worked at HarperCollins Digital Interactive Group. He's taught at New School University, Parsons School of Design, Academy of Art University, UC Berkeley, and is currently at Publicis Sapient as a senior associate in experience technology, I think is the official title.
The tour ran through my resume pretty well. I can't really add that much to it. I have been, so let me go back to the beginning. I started actually as a print designer, and the reason I started as a print designer, so I kind of started, my career started like about 15 minutes before Netscape Navigator became a thing. So before the web, which I hope you all understand is not the internet, so the web, the part you look at in a browser, became big, I had already started my career in, I mean, at the time, mostly what we distributed through was CD-ROMs, which if you can believe it, if you wanted to deliver content to people, you had to put it in the mail on a CD-ROM, which my son didn't know what one was. So it looks like a CD. Well, it looks like a CD. If you don't know what a CD is, those shiny discs with a hole in the middle. You had to take those, you had to package them up, and you had to mail them to people if you wanted to distribute something. Or you could send them a floppy disk. The floppy disk could hold a whopping 1.3 megabytes of content. That's where my career began. You can work backwards and figure out how old I am, and I will not admit it, even though this is recorded and on the internet forever. I was really interested in print design. I was a big avid reader and writer. I see the question before or after Laserdiscs. After. The Laserdiscs were the big ones. I was very small when Laserdiscs were big. These are the smaller ones. I started as a print designer. I was really a big reader, and I actually majored in politics as an undergraduate, but my undergraduate thesis was on the political novel. I focused mostly actually on Franz Kafka and how his novels were political in a certain sense. So I was like Mr. Humanities guy, like totally sociology, psychology, reading, writing based. But I was really interested in books and page layout and how books were laid out and how pages were laid out. And at one point I found, I don't remember where I was, but it was a one sheet by the AIGA, the American Institute of Graphic Arts, that showed all the proofreaders' marks in red ink over black text. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. I don't know if you've seen the proofreaders' marks, but or if you know what I'm talking about when I say proofreaders' marks, but they're the marks that editors use to edit copy. And so if they need a space inserted or they need a word inserted, they have specific nomenclature that they use to edit copy. And I just thought that was to convey to the author or the typesetter exactly what it is they need done. And I thought that stuff was cool. My first job that was in this field, if it could be said to be that, was actually in a printing shop called the Inkwell. It was in downtown Chicago. We actually did 4-color separations. I famously got into an argument with the editor of Chicago Magazine about the correct spelling of hors d'oeuvres, and I was right and he was wrong.
Did he apologize?
That was on my resume in the beginning anyway. It's not there anymore. He did not apologize. He was not too happy to see that he had been beaten by this scrappy young man covered in ink. But as I went on with my career, I noticed that more and more things were moving to first to CD-ROM. So I got really interested in CD-ROM design, and I had a job working for PR Newswire in New York City. They're still around. They do press releases for companies. So if a company releases a new product, they will write the press release and release it onto the wires. Then we call them the wires. Now it's released to the internet. Everything's released to the internet. And I saw a job in the newspaper. I actually opened up the New York Times looking for another job because I thought that job wasn't quite a good fit for me. And I saw an ad for a multimedia developer, actually multimedia director of multimedia at a company called ArcSlide in southern New Jersey. So there I am in New York City, living the dream in New York City. And I moved to this tiny, tiny town in southern New Jersey. And the day before my interview, I took out the owner's manual for a program called Macromedia Director. I read it from cover to cover. And then I walked into that interview and completely lied that I knew everything about Director, that I was this awesome Director developer, and that there was no stopping me. They believed me, and I got the job. And I've kind of worked in this field ever since. At first, it was pretty heavily multimedia, as I said, actually mailing CD-ROMs. The internet came up a little bit after that, so we started to distribute stuff on the internet pretty quickly, but I was really involved in some of the earliest wave websites. I did work for Western Union, and I'm trying to think of other companies that worked for back then, some work for Prudential. These were early companies trying to get on the web, and at the time, the web was the Wild West. One thing I will say from having worked the web in the very beginning is I would have bet the farm if you had asked me at the beginning of my career which way the web was going to go. Was it going to be this like sort of concentrated, like, you know, power of the people type organic holistic thing, or was it going to be completely dominated by business and commercial enterprise and sales? I would have bet 100% on the first one. I was so sure it was going to be this grand revolution of ideas. Artists were going to take it over, and it was going to become this freedom of expression thing. And it became the exact opposite, up to and including what happened in the last election. For I would never have guessed that when I started my career. At that time, I prototyped some software that was known as Future Splash. It then became Flash, which dominated the web for a long time. I never liked it. I never used it, but
I remember that.
as Tor has heard me say more times than he probably cares to remember. But that's about when I got into it. Since then, I have, so after my earlier forays into multimedia and then web design, working in New Jersey, I decided to move back to New York City because it's New York City. And I started my own business. I started a company called Kanter Ross New Media. I partnered with a very, very talented designer, Natasha Ross, who's now Natasha Botipka. And she and I ran a company. It was just the two of us in this little shabby mouse-infested office on Bleecker Street. We were right across the street from Razorfish. Razorfish at the time became one of the biggest web design companies in the world. It still is. I think it was actually acquired by Sapient, which is interesting because now I finally work for Razorfish all these years later. We were right across the street from them, and we couldn't understand why they were charging people like millions of dollars for websites. You could actually make serious amounts of money back in those days as a web designer. I remember, for instance, there was a website called boo.com where every day they had a virtual avatar read the news. That's all the website was. A virtual robot programmed avatar would read the day's news. They spent something like $1,500 a day to come up with a haircut for this avatar. And that company made millions and millions of dollars. I was wiped out. My company was wiped out in the first stock market crash, or the first, they call it the dot bomb crash of 2001. We just were wiped out. I mean, it went from being this vibrant, exciting, active internet culture, and like our phone was ringing off the hook, and we were turning away work, to just like somebody flipped a switch and boom, there was no work to be had anywhere for anybody. A lot of those 1.0 companies are gone. The ones that didn't collapse then, you may have heard of, they're called things like Amazon, or they kind of have tended to be business entities that sort of moved through that period but were in different businesses. They weren't internet only companies. I was fortunate enough to be asked to teach at the Parsons School of Design, and I was actually teaching there part-time, and right as the lights went out on the internet, they asked me to join the full-time faculty. I worked there for about 8 years, and then in 2008, I moved to San Francisco. I now live in suburban San Francisco. I live just outside the city. If you're familiar with San Francisco, I live right over the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County. And I've been working in San Francisco, continuing to be a web developer. I continued to teach when I first moved here, but in 2012, I kind of decided I'd had enough of teaching and decided to go back into the industry full time. The very first job I had when I made that decision was at LucasArts, and LucasArts was, I think, the coolest job I'm ever going to have. I mean, I was right there with all the people making all the Star Wars movies, in the nerve center of all of that. I forget what the movie is that came out, but it was the first new Star Wars movie that had come out in quite a while. Was it The Last Jedi, or was that before that. So first, Star Wars Rebels, if you've seen that, was out on TV, and then the new movie came out, and people were emailing me from like all over the world to ask me, who's going to be in the new movie? What's the new movie all about? What's going on in the new movie? I mean, we were right there. I mean, we were sitting right next to the video games development team. We were testing video games that you can go out and play right now. We were playing them in early, but which I mean, like, you know, coin operated. If you go to like, you know, one of these huge arcades now, that's like one of the ones you sit in and it spins around and moves. Like, we were sitting right next to prototypes of that. Inside that building, they had like the models. If you've seen a LucasArts movie, like the models that they use in those movies or the backgrounds or whatever, those were just sitting there. They were just in the hall there. You could go right up and touch ET's bicycle if you wanted to. It's just right there. So that was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, if you followed LucasArts, they were acquired by Disney. Disney moved all their production down to the Southern California, and I didn't really want to move. And what's more, I wasn't really asked if I wanted to join them. So I left LucasArts. Since then, I've kind of worked, as a freelance developer, off and on, different things. I worked for Autodesk for a while. That's a really interesting company. If you're not familiar with them, you should look them up because they have an awful lot of software that they like to give to students. It started mostly as an architectural company doing CAD rendering. And they have done a lot of interesting things in their current incarnation. They're doing a lot of interesting things with building and building materials. So they have software now where if you decide to build a giant building in downtown Toledo, you can actually design the whole thing with Autodesk products. But it's not just the design now; it's actually all the materials management. So you can actually see how much money it would cost to cool your building if you built it with this exterior window versus that exterior window, or what your cost change would be if you decided to paint the building green and not blue, or how far you would be from LEED certification if you built your air conditioning this way or that way. So they've actually gone from just the outside exterior design into the material management and supply chain management. And they're doing a lot of great stuff there. I would really suggest to look up Autodesk if you haven't seen it. They have a really interesting product called Dreamcatcher. And Dreamcatcher will actually use artificial intelligence, which is actually a topic I'm going to get back to a little bit later, and to actually can design intelligently. And in fact, the demo that they have, I think they have a video of it, is they put two fabricators on either side of a creek. They connect it to Dreamcatcher. I keep wanting to say Dreamweaver, which is something entirely different, to Dreamcatcher, and the two fabricators actually work together to build the bridge over the lake. And you can actually watch them doing that in real time using artificial intelligence. So they're doing a lot of interesting stuff like that. I currently work for Sapient. Sapient is a large company. They actually recently acquired Razorfish. I think it's one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. It's headquartered in France. It's been around in some incarnation or another since the 1950s. Most of what we do at Sapient is we work in project teams for our clients. The client I'm working for right now is Wawa. If you've never heard of them, Wawa is a large convenience store that's on the East Coast. It's kind of like a 7-Eleven. People love Wawa. It's got followers. If you know anyone who's from Philadelphia, they love their Wawa. They sell that sort of Philadelphia food there, the cheesesteaks and all that other stuff. I am the only West Coast developer on the team, which means I have to keep East Coast hours. We're all working from home right now. I have an office in San Francisco somewhere that I've never seen. I could not find my desk. If you held a gun to my head, I have no idea where it is, but I have a desk somewhere. But so I work from home right here in this room where my kid keeps running in to interrupt me all day. That is not my child. I don't know if you've seen this actually happening in real life, but this is a video of a BBC reporter while he was talking live. His daughter came running in the room after him. You could probably look this up too. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty funny. He continues to try to give the report while his children are coming in the room, and right behind her comes a toddler in a little walker chair. So that is everything I have to say about where I am and how I got to where I am now. Oh, wait. Didn't explain what I actually do. So I work on a team of developers. It's actually a very large project. Wawa is trying very hard to get into the digital industry and especially to support online food delivery. If you've been paying any attention at all to the news, you might have heard that there's this virus going around, whatever. home delivery, which I'm assuming some of you have benefited from, has become massive. I mean, Amazon has made more money than everybody else put together, but online food delivery, DoorDash, and whatever else. So Wawa is trying to move into this business pretty quickly, which I think they would have had to do one way or another, but which they're trying to do very aggressively right now. So I work on a team of developers. We develop front-end components for Wawa.com, and we're working on this sort of huge enterprise-wide architecture for to handle food delivery. You know, kind of the Wawa of the future, what Wawa will look like in the future. Food delivery, but not just food delivery. I mean, everything that they deliver. That's what I'm working on. So I mostly work on front-end components. What a front-end web developer usually does is everything you can sort of see, hear, and touch on a website. I do not deal with the data backends. I do not come up with the business models. I do not run the databases. If you could see it, hear it, touch it, when you go to Wawa.com, I've probably built it or know the person who has. So that's primarily what I do, is the front end, and then work with the teams to connect it to the data that drives the experience that you actually have. So that's my very long-winded introduction of myself. Wow, only 19 minutes. Does anyone have any questions about anything I've said so far, or I can keep talking either way?
Well, I was just going to ask a question. So you would describe this, you know, like you're a UX designer? Are you a web designer? Like if you had to put a specific label on it, what would you call it?
These terms change every 10 minutes.
Oh,
I mean, I
true.
started as a web, what did I start as? I started as a programmer, which you just don't even use that term anymore. I think my actual title, as you said earlier, and I don't even know what it is senior experience developer. Developer generally means that you spend all day in front of code, which I do. So I use a technology called React. It's the same, it's a JavaScript library. JavaScript is the most widely used language on the internet. It's the same technology that was used to build Facebook. In fact, React is the JavaScript library that was invented by Facebook to build Facebook. It's now available as open source. It makes it very easy to create rich internet interfaces to do anything you want, from entering credit card information, shopping, you know, you want to try clothes on online, you want to chat with your friends, whatever, you can do all of that. So that's the language I used to build the websites.
Great.
Any other questions? Glad to answer as many questions as you all have.
I have one, if you don't mind. What do you feel like helped you the most to get you where you are today?
I have been so I was a teacher for a long time, so I've been asked this question a lot, to tell you the honest truth. The one thing I tell people really quickly, and especially in my own classes, is you really have to be willing to change. This industry has, I mean, you've heard me explain my career, and honestly, I'm not that old. And I mean, I've learned whole entire protocols and architectures and languages that are completely obsolete now. If I ask someone who is just starting out now, have you ever heard of these languages? They'd look at me like I had just fallen out of a cave in 200,000 BC. So I think you really have to have hunger to learn. I think you have to have that flexibility, willingness to change. I think you have to have a curiosity, and I think you have to have fun with it. I find that most of the stuff that I do and most of the progress that I've made has come from being willing to like tinker, sitting, designing, developing. That can be online or offline. I mean, I sit here and work with, when I'm not actually writing code, I might sit and mess around with gizmos. This is a Raspberry Pi, which is sitting right here on my desk. If you don't know what these are, you should Google it. And just sort of having that curiosity and determination to learn new stuff. I don't know how else to put it more succinctly than that. You really have to be willing to learn new stuff all the time. What I suggest to most people is find one thing to be really good at, one thing that you're the best at. If that's typography, if that's page layout, if that's color theory, whatever it is, get really good at that, and then get sort of good at everything else. would be the advice I would give. I can't put it more succinctly than that. I mean, and I think that's true of whatever you do. If you don't want to change and you never want to do things differently, change your major to pottery. They're still doing it the same way they were 4,000 years ago, and that will never change your whole life. Go for it. But if you want to do anything with modern technology, you're going to change. You're going to change again and again and again and again and again. Who I am right now looks nothing like what I looked like at the beginning of my career, and that's not because I've grown as a person. I have, but it's mostly because the industry has changed and the demands of the job have changed constantly the whole way through. 100%. It's a great question. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, just a small one. Did you meet Tor at Parsons?
No, actually. Tor actually, when I ran that company in New York City, Tor's company hired, or not hired, but I think they brought our company to look at, we were proposing to work together. I don't think that project ever happened. That's where I met him. But then like 3 or 4 years later, I was teaching at Parsons and he walked into my classroom. So that's where I got to know him, but I didn't actually meet him there.
Well, when you were running Kanter Ross, we were going to work with you on some web stuff because I was working for a .com startup that just utterly failed miserably and actually still owes me money. But anyway, no bitterness there. But then the .com collapse happened, 9/11 happened in 2001, and a lot changed in New York City. And so we kind of all went in different directions. It's hard to describe what even 9/11 had, what the effect it had on New York City small businesses, because remote work like this was not really a thing then. Like we had WebEx, and there were a few competitors, but it just wasn't reliable. People didn't have the right internet access at home. There was no setup for it. So,
in fact, if I remember correctly, the project we were going to work on was to do online collaboration and meetings.
Yes.
So like that hadn't even been invented yet. We were gonna try to build that.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah. 9/11 was something else altogether, but it stopped a lot of things in New York City just right in their tracks.
Yep.
So Tor sent me this list of questions, and I'm going to go through these because they're great questions. And the third, so I've answered 1 and 2, I think. 3 is, what challenges do I see in the industry or perhaps in the general culture of the industry? And I think this is a really good question. And there are a lot of challenges. I think that one really huge challenge that I've seen the whole way through in the industry, and I'm going to get to sort of more current contemporary challenges, but one of the I've seen the whole way through in the industry is there's kind of no real standards. There's nothing that says I'm a web developer or you're a developer. You can go to school, you can get a PhD in typography. That doesn't mean you're any better a designer than somebody who might have taken like 3 classes at night school. And in fact, in some cases, in a lot of cases, that can make you worse. There is no standardization. There's no way to point to somebody and say, okay, this person has, I mean, obviously, if you've gone to like MIT Media Lab or you're a Stanford graduate, I mean, there are some schools and some certifications that will definitely open doors for you. But generally speaking, across the board, there really aren't. And anybody can put out a shingle and say, I'm a web designer. That's been a huge challenge. It's been less of a challenge for me, especially as my career has progressed, because I have enough skill to move forward, but I don't have any degree in anything web related. Those schools didn't exist when I was starting my career. So, and when I started Parsons, I was like brand new. I mean, my qualification was that I was out there actually doing it, which made me that little bit smarter than all the people who weren't. So that's been a huge challenge, I think. And that's something I actually asked you to sort of keep an eye on as you continue your careers. And it's why I say to get really good at that one thing. The reason it's become such a huge challenge is because I've seen a lot of people, if you own a mom and pop store and you're just making some product, I mean, you make the best shoes in Western Kansas, and you want to move online, you got to get online, but you don't know how to do that. There's a restaurant right down the street from it. We love this restaurant. We eat there all the time. To get online, they've had to they've contracted with a vendor who has really taken advantage of them. It's driven their prices up. And if you get the food delivered, you pay a premium for having the food delivered. They don't do the delivery themselves. Now that eats into that company's bottom line, because there's only so much that they can raise their prices, right? I'm not going to pay $30 for an entree from there, right? I'm just not going to pay that. So when those prices come up, it actually comes out of the company's bottom end. And I think that the bottom feeders and the people who are just in it for the wrong reasons, that's been a huge challenge all the way through, just both for my clients. The job I'm doing right now, we're taking over from a company that just completely misrepresented its capabilities. You know, it's been tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars spent on building nothing. And I just see that as the big challenge. And I would just say that's something, really look out to what you're getting yourself into and who you're working with, and feel free to speak up. But let's get into the uncomfortable issues, because it asks me here about things such as racism, sexism. I'm aware that I got out of teaching in 2012. I haven't been in the classroom in a while. However, I'm fairly aware. I have a 12-year-old son, and I know that you as students must be incredibly aware of issues of social justice, issues of racial justice, issues of things like restorative justice, dealing with the massive amounts of unfairly incarcerated people in this country. And I'm not going to make a political statement here or have any of my own I'm going to try my best not to bring any of my own personal biases into it, but that's a huge problem in the tech industry. The tech industry has a massive racism and sexism problem. It has frustrated me all my career. I have rarely worked with African-American developers. I mean, they're just not around. When I was in, I mean, I'm not going to say there's none, but I go out in the street and I see how many Black people there are, and I go to work and I see how many Black people there are, and that's two completely different sets of numbers. Very rarely do I work with female programmers. This question has been asked a lot. And again, I'm going to get to artificial intelligence in just a minute, which I'll have more to say about this, but I get asked a lot. You know, I go on LinkedIn, for instance, and I see a lot of people posting like, oh, what can we do to get more African Americans involved in the industry? But here's something I'm going to tell you. I've taught now at 4 different schools, and I've been involved in admissions at 2 of them. It's not that we're not letting Black candidates in. It's not that we're not letting women into these programs. It's that they're not applying. They're not there. They're not in the applications. And when they get there, for whatever reason, they can tend to be a little bit less qualified than white students. I have been involved in this issue at the K-12 level a little bit, and I think that there is a lot that goes on. You know, I mean, I think a lot of older people are just really uncomfortable with this whole woke idea, and they're so tired of like, why we can't make the jokes we used to make, and we can't say the things we used to say. But I mean, I'll honestly say that racism is a real thing. Sexism is a real thing. I mean, it exists. I've encountered it, but I've been lucky. I mean, I haven't really had to deal with massive amounts of racism in my life, but I think that there's a bias in the schools in K-12. I think there's a bias in the language we use in our everyday lives. I think that there's a bias in the way that newspaper stories are written, a clear bias. I think there's a bias on the evening news, a clear bias. And I think it's really holding a lot of people back in our country. I had the privilege of living in Europe for a little bit. I did not see anywhere near the same amounts of differences being made between people there. I mean, I worked in a restaurant. I was young. I was working as an illegal immigrant in England, waiting tables. And there was no difference between the Middle Eastern people and the Black people. And we just worked together. We didn't even care where people were from. Here, that becomes an issue. Even if everyone's getting along, it becomes an issue no matter what. I would really ask you, especially as designers, to just continue, I mean, speaking up for those issues and challenging those issues. It might be uncomfortable, but I would say get involved in that. I would really just go after that and do what you can. I think you're living in a great time. I think that you really can make a difference right now. And I'm not saying that because I'm trying to sound like a Hallmark card. But I mean, I really think just with one last like big push right now, we really could knock the crazy, like it's our nation's greatest shame, but the crazy bias and racism that's just everywhere in this country, that half the country wants to go blah, blah, blah. The problem with racism is you talk about it. No, it's not the problem. The problem with racism is it's just baked into the current system. And whatever you can do, I would say as a designer to move past that, please, please, please do it. I mean, you have a lot more support than you might think. I'm going to stop and ask if anyone has questions on that. I know I just made a bunch of very general, broad blanket statements, but if anybody has anything to ask me about that, please bring it right up. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of if I'm interested in getting involved in projects that are bringing more of the education to that underserved community, women, young girls, Black and Brown communities, etc. Like, what is a good way to start going that direction? Like, uh, as far as like vetting the opportunities out there, like how
I mean,
do you understand why? I'm sorry, I'm not very articulate today.
you're asking how to get involved, how to get started on stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that your question? I mean, I'm not really sure where you all are located. I mean, I'm going to guess you're somewhere around Washington State. I would say that one of the easiest ways to get involved is K-12. You probably have a lot of K-12 teachers that are sitting in the classroom with their kids bored and staring out the window. You know, these kids are going home and they're on Roblox all day, or they play. They probably don't play Fortnite in elementary school, but you know, they're on computers all day. They have phones, they have iPads. They've had them their whole lives. You know, I can remember a time when there wasn't an internet. I can remember a time where the internet cost something like $15 an hour to connect to. I'm not even kidding about that. And
no, you're not.
yeah, I can remember, you know, $15 an hour. So you're on the internet for 10 hours, you owe $150. Like, that's not a joke. But now kids don't, you know, probably kids your age, I mean, you don't remember a time without the internet, and that's awesome. I think there's a lot of teachers in K-12 that would really like to go in and give demos and show, you know, I mean, in my own son's school, I've gone in and give demos on, what's it called? The MIT programming language, Sketch, is it called? And just sitting down and like, okay, hey, let's all try to program Flappy Birds. And the kids love that. I mean, you can go right into the communities and do that. You can reach out, I'm pretty sure, to at-risk communities, or offer to volunteer to give time to do things like job training. But it doesn't even have to be job training. I mean, you can volunteer for the Literacy Tutors of America. But I think that there's a huge amount of desire, I think, for people to learn. I mean, we had in the last program I taught at, which was Academy of Art University here in San Francisco, we had a day where there was an organization that was working with African-American youth to try to bring them into the technology sector. And I just invited them in to critique my students, my graduate students. And they were asking some really tough questions. These little kids came in and were just blowing these students out of the water in terms of their knowledge, and like, how are you planning to do this or that, or how do you plan to account for this, that, and the other. So any kind of opportunity you can create, I mean, any way you can, or maybe there's just a kid down the street, you know, just sit with that kid for an hour a week. I mean, all of that stuff will absolutely help. I would really suggest reaching into the schools. I would really suggest working for nonprofits. There are going to be nonprofits if you're interested, whatever you're interested in, there's a nonprofit working in that. That could be food security, that could be working in the prisons, that could be working in disadvantaged communities, that could be working in minority communities, that could be working with women or girls. All of that stuff exists. All that stuff is out there, and it's an internet search away. And I'm going to tell you right now, they would be glad to have you come aboard and help them out with all that stuff. There's always an opportunity there.
Christine, if you're specifically asking about programming, there are organizations like code.org, which do the Hour of Code stuff, and they have tons of curriculum online and volunteer resources and teacher resources, and you can take those into a school if you're willing to, but you have to be willing to spend the time to do that, right? Like, that's an investment of time. So,
but you get paid back, because, you know, if you really think you understand something, turn around and try to explain it to someone else. That's 100 times harder than coming up with the understanding in the first place. Like, you have no idea. First day I taught, I wrote my name on the blackboard. I turned around to a classroom full of people and I had no idea what to say. I remember that moment. I froze in my tracks. So you get paid back for that time. I mean, you might think like, oh, you know, it's a waste of time. It is not, because you will learn, just in having to prepare a course syllabus alone, you will learn tons and tons and tons of stuff. And in fact, it's what attracted me to teaching, was that kept me more up to speed than anything else, because I was always having to adapt to whatever was new in the world. I had to make that same change in the classroom. So you definitely get that time back. It's definitely worth it. It doesn't have to be a lot either. Like an hour a week is plenty. Fast Company came out with a magazine that was all about girls who code. I want to say it was like 10 years ago. Maybe look at that, because I'm sure there's some. I mean, even though that was a while ago, there was a whole movement towards girls who code. I'm not really sure where it came from, but that was like a buzzword for quite a few years there. I bet that there's still a lot of initiatives or whatever else that came out of that might be worth looking into. I just want to stop for a minute because I see we have, what, 20 minutes left or so?
Yeah. It's 45 to 60 minutes, whatever people can spare today. And we've got some interesting topics. You mentioned artificial intelligence a minute ago, and I'm really curious where you're going with that. But yeah, we have 20-ish minutes for the full hour.
So that was what I was going to turn to next, was artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, I could give a very quick overview of the artificial intelligence industry. It basically started in World War II. If you've studied Alan Turing, or if you've seen, there was a movie about him with that dreamy Benedict Cumberbatch a few years ago. I forget what it was called, but it was about Alan Turing. And it was mostly directed at German code breaking, the United States and the Allies, actually the English, trying to code break the German communications so as to win World War II, which they did. Any movie you've seen about the Enigma machines, I mean, they've made a zillion movies about this in all kinds of flavors. Became a huge thing in the Imitation Game. Thank you. Yes, the Imitation Game was the movie. It became a huge flavor in the 1950s and 60s, but there actually, most people don't know this, there was a big crash in artificial intelligence in the 70s and 80s because IBM investors could not understand why IBM was spending so much money to teach a computer how to play chess. Like, what? We don't need computers to play chess. We don't need them to do that. I think they kind of missed the point. So, people say, why do we explore space? We spend all this money on NASA, and why do we spend money to explore space? Because that's kind of what human beings do. We get in boats, we go on walks, we go out and we try to explore and colonize. And I think it's about the perseverance of the human race. And we could get into a philosophical conversation on that, but we're not going to, not today. I'll come back next week for that. But I think in terms of artificial intelligence, it's kind of an inward exploration. It's kind of an inward exploration of why we do things. So IBM couldn't understand, IBM and stockholders, actually, IBM knew why they were teaching a computer to play chess, but IBM shareholders couldn't understand it. But the reason why was because these led to a lot of things you probably take for granted now. I'm sure you've all seen an advertisement for something that you were interested in that came up online. Has anyone done, I can't really see a show of hands, but I'm sure you've all done a Google search for something like, the one I remember is my dryer in the garage broke, and I had to buy a new starter for it. And I Googled, replacing a dryer starter, and I bought one. But then I noticed the ads for like weeks were all about selling me washer dryer, selling me this part. It's not like I needed 10 of these things. I just needed one. So after I'd bought the part and fixed the dryer, I was still getting ads for this part and for, do you need a new dryer? And, call home consultants. And it was all this stuff. So all of that stuff that happens now, it's actually a direct result of all that artificial intelligence. If you've been following artificial intelligence at all, you might be familiar with one of three things I can think of. One is Deep Blue, which was the computer that finally beat a human being at chess. Although there's some argument about whether or not the computer team cheated. I'll let you Google that and you can see what you think. Two was the Watson, the computer that won Jeopardy. And, if you look at it, you're like, well, a computer won Jeopardy, big deal. If I could just do lightning fast Google searches, I could win Jeopardy too. But that's not what that computer did. That computer actually learned trivia, enough trivia to win at Jeopardy. It's kind of an interesting thing. And then the third thing you may or may not be following is the one I just mentioned, which is online advertising, which has been a massive driver of artificial intelligence. If you think of artificial intelligence as something in the future, absolutely not. It's here. It's here right now. It's being used right now. The next time you go on the web, you almost surely will come into contact with artificial intelligence of some kind or another. Every day you're coming in contact with it. If you use Siri, if you have a, what is that thing called that's in everybody's house?
Alexa.
Alexa.
Yeah.
yeah, if you have that, it's all artificial intelligence. And those things are creepy. Like, I don't, like if you read those old books like George Orwell, or you read like Jeremy Bentham and the Talk of the Panopticon, I think what none of those authors ever realized in their wildest imaginations was, instead of having to be forced to do this, we would just all volunteer to do this. Sure, I'll put this little spying thing in my house. I'll even pay $30 for the privilege. Nobody ever thought we were gonna, that's the part of it they got wrong, was that we would all be glad. We're like, yeah, let the spies right into the house. The reason I wanted to talk about a little bit about artificial intelligence, and right now there's primarily two kinds. There's what's called deep learning, and there's what's called machine learning. In both cases, what the systems are primarily geared to do are one of two things. It's either to analyze massive chunks of data, which is actually an incredibly massively useful thing. I worked on a project when I was at Parsons. It was called the Parsons Institute for Information Mapping, and we were being brought these sort of signals intelligence. It was a sort of signals intelligence project where the challenge was, we know how to connect the data, but we don't know how to read the data. And it would literally have taken like thousands of human beings, all day, every day, to just be going through all of this signals data that was being collected. And you're trying to find patterns, right? If you have heard of a famous data scientist called Claude Shannon, he famously coined the phrase, what you're interested in signals intelligence is the difference that makes the difference. What you might hear this called now is something like signal to noise ratio or something like that. So you can hear a lot of noise. In fact, you're hearing a lot of noise right now, but my voice is breaking through most of it. So that's the difference in signal that's leading to understanding. What computers have allowed us to do with deep learning is go through massive amounts of data, and data is being collected all the time. When you use your phone, when you go online, unless you're like me and you have it all turned off, you're being tracked everywhere, everything you do all the time, right? I mean, if you go on Facebook or Instagram or any of that, right, you know they're watching you, you know they're tracking you. If you don't know, read up on it, because they really are. You send massive amounts of data to the cloud every day, but there was really no way to analyze it. And now there are becoming ways to analyze it. The other way is machine learning, which is where you can kind of train an entity to do something. Like, you can say, I actually built one where I tried to find the difference. I sent it in a bunch of pictures, and I tried to find the difference between pictures that were of Donald Trump and pictures that were of Angela Merkel. And I trained this thing to be smart enough to go out. I could feed it any thousands of pictures, and it could pick out all the pictures of Trump versus all the pictures of Merkel. But it wasn't, it was trained to do that. Like, I trained it to actually recognize Donald Trump and Angela Merkel in photos. Why I say this matters to designers and to developers is because, like I said, this future is here. But what we're finding is that these artificial intelligence computers and these artificial intelligence sensors are coming with things like bias. We're finding that these things are racist. We're finding that these things make certain assumptions that we don't want them to make, because we really want them to be neutral and unbiased and fair. Now, I ask you, where are these biases coming from? Because they're not coming from the computers. So they're coming from the societies in which they're being programmed. They're coming directly out of the culture, the bias that's already in the culture, and that bias is being pushed right into these algorithms. This is huge, because this has to do with how people are being loaned money, access to credit, for instance. Most people don't know this, but the largest economic sector of the United States economy is credit, is debt from credit. It's debt from mortgages, it's debt from credit cards, it's debt from auto loans. That's the biggest sector of the economy. But a lot of people don't even know this. So what I'm sort of challenging people to do as designers is, and you might have some concept of fairness. It's very different from my concept of fairness. But what I would ask for designers and developers to do moving forward is to really take a close look at how this stuff is being used and how this stuff is being implemented. And maybe just ask you to sort of pay attention to what's going on, not only with your own personal data, but as you're designing and you're going in and designing, digital software, what's ethical? I've seen different organizations. I mean, I actually recently listened to a podcast from an organization that they want to data mine to help people be more healthy, right? That's a great goal, isn't it? We're going to mine your data, and we're going to figure out, if you're eating, 6 pints of ice cream a week, you shouldn't do that. That's not good for you. You're going to get the diabetes. So they were trying to like follow people's shopping patterns and all that to give them alternate choices or to make them healthier. But what I heard this data scientist that was discussing the product say was, when we set out to design this product, our number one concern was privacy. We did not want people to have their data shared online. We did not want for there to be a big data breach like there has been at companies like Walmart and Target, and I think even financial institutions. We didn't want our customers to be in a position where someone could exploit their data. If you live in certain states, for instance, right now, the state will actually sell your driver's license information to companies to make money, to raise revenue for the state. People don't know these things. So I would just ask, and this isn't because I'm some like liberal hippie San Francisco conspiracy theorist. This is actually happening. You can look all of this up. Everything I'm saying, Google it. It's all right there for you to see. But people don't pay a lot of attention to that. People don't know how to turn off location services on their phone. You don't have to be tracked. People don't know why you wouldn't buy Alexa. My dad was like, I got Alexa. I'm like, Dad, why did you get Alexa? What the hell is the matter with you? They don't understand what the trade-off is in a lot of this stuff. And I would just really ask, as designers and developers of the future, is, I really liked hearing that CEOs say privacy is our number one concern. The CEOs I don't hear saying that are the CEOs of Google, are the CEOs of Apple, are the CEOs of Facebook. Privacy is not their number one concern. They will take your information and they will monetize it, and they will make as much money as they can off it as fast as they can. There's a great phrase that maybe some of you have heard, which is, if you're getting something for free, if the product is free, then the product is you. They're not giving it away because they're out of the kindness of their heart. Mark Zuckerberg didn't become some zillionaire because Facebook is free. They make that money because they're able to sell that data. They're able to tell manufacturers stuff about you. They're able to tell advertisers about you. I have worked on advertising campaigns, and believe me, we're grabbing every single thing we can from you when you come online. We can figure out your age. We can figure out where you live. We can figure out what kind of things you buy. We can figure out what kind of foods you like to eat. We know all that about you. And I would just really ask, as designers moving forward, to really verse yourself in what's going on with artificial intelligence, and really try to understand these fields. And I'd like to hear more CEOs say things in the future like, our number one concern is privacy. I'd really like to hear more of those kinds of statements in the future. So if there's one appeal I have to you as futurists, would be to take a good hard look at what's going on. Be aware, get involved, and try to answer some of these questions for the better and maybe not the worse. And maybe you think that there's nothing wrong with people giving their privacy away. Fine. Then don't do that. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I think we've got some pretty big problems coming with the huge invasion of privacy, and we haven't even begun to realize the ramifications of yet. Okay, I think I've talked on and on and on for long enough. Are there any more questions or anything else I can tell anybody?
I just wanted to point out, you and I probably remember when Google had the unofficial motto, "Don't be evil," that they kind of officially they stopped using a few years ago. Now it's "Do the right thing" or something like that.
Silently faded away. "Don't be evil" just kind of disappeared. No press release. It just, so now they're evil.
And I think people
now it's be evil.
Yeah, well, okay. But maybe, but yes, we are the product for these free services. But if people really understood what they were giving away, would they think twice about it? That's the question. Like, people don't understand that they are the product. Of course, that's been true for broadcast television for years, right? You're getting this free broadcast signal, but you are the product that's being sold to the advertiser.
And we own the broadcast signal. We own it. The people of the United States own those broadcast signals. And yet, you have to pay. Like if a football game is on 2 weeks ago and you want to watch it again, you have to pay someone for that. Even though it was your money, your tax money, your whatever, that paid for that to make that broadcast possible. I mean, I think we really lose track of how this happens, where the money goes.
So does anyone else have a question?
Yeah. I guess kind of almost like two questions, but you know, depending on time. But the whole AI tracking your purchases from one site to another. Um, in your own coding, in your own experience, have you ever planted like a tracking pixel out of efficacy or not?
Oh yeah, we do it all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
any site that you go in, I mean, whenever you connect to a server, you give a ton of information to that server, including a server can make a reasonable guess about, say, for instance, where in the United States you are. And any site worth its salt is always going to want to leave what's called a cookie behind, so that when you come back, I mean, if you've ever gone back to a site and you know your name is Jim, and you go back and they're like, "Hi, Jim," right there they're tracking you, and that's pretty much every site I've ever been on. So yeah, I have definitely left that information. You can turn all that stuff off, but nobody does. So yes, that's all. I have done that, and we'll probably do it again.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah,
Was it-
and I guess like my other question is almost like, because I know a couple years ago, even like maybe 5 years ago, I feel like the designer like competition like for students has just like gotten way higher. The bar has been raised, the standards, and it just feels way harder to get into the industry. Because I remember talking to an alumni panel last semester, and this guy said that he applied to 200 jobs and only got 2 responses. So that's my benchmark. And that's like 100 applications per like offer. So what's your thoughts on that?
This is a tough one. I don't want to discourage anyone. The American Institute of Graphic Arts, which I had mentioned earlier in the call, actually wrote an open letter to the industry saying, actually to schools in the industry saying, please stop accepting applicants, because every year they were graduating more designers than there were design jobs in the United States. And that was like 10 or 12 years ago that letter came out. I'm not going to lie to you. It's awfully competitive. It's a lot more competitive than it was when I started, especially where I live in San Francisco. The salaries are sky high, but that really takes, you really gotta know what you're doing. In the beginning, I didn't have to ever answer tests. Now I have to go through these massive tests and examination projects to move ahead. I will tell you right now, I'm kind of answering the question you didn't quite ask. The number one thing I would say to do is do as much stuff as you can. Have a portfolio, have a website, try to add to that all the time. You shouldn't work for free, but if you have pro bono work that you can do for charities, do that and get it in your portfolio. Go to meetups. The more visible you are, the more of a chance you'll have. But yes, it is definitely, I'm not going to say it's not competitive. I have students that are like tour teaching. I have students that went to graduate school and now they work as they got out of completely and they moved into the restaurant industry, or they went into finance, or they went into something else. It's competitive. I'm not going to lie. It's not as competitive as some industries, but it's fairly competitive market.
It's worth pointing out that the entire economy right now stinks. In every field, people are struggling to find jobs, but in this field, compared to where it was 10, 20 years ago, as Dave just said, suddenly you have to like go through quizzes online and do free work just to even be considered. And that's not the way it was previously. That really has gotten harder.
I'll also say where you live in the country will make a difference. So there's obviously more opportunities for designers in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles than there are in, smaller cities, or even, Atlanta or Cincinnati, or I'm having trouble thinking of the smaller cities, San Diego, Baltimore. So living in a big city definitely helps. There's no two ways about that. Does anyone else have questions? Don't want to hog up too much more time. So we got time for one more.
I actually have a question, sorry. Like you mentioned before, like it's hard to find diversity in like companies or like industries. Do you think that's because of the fact that the competition is hard, or because people are more willing to do it freelance than work for a company?
You're saying are you asking about that in terms of race, or are you just asking in general?
In general.
So wait a minute, maybe I'm not sure I understand your question.
So I know
You're saying,
oh, sorry. So like we just mentioned that it is hard for diversity to come in industries or to apply for people to be applying to industry because they don't actually take the first step in doing it. But like we see it more in race, right? But like let's say in general, is it because they know that they can do it individually like a freelance, or is it because of the competition, in your opinion? You're muted, sorry.
You're muted.
gosh, that's an interesting question. Honestly, I would say it's both. Um, I mean, diversity is such a weird thing right now. I mean, most companies to figure out diversity, they like went to their like, I mean, I'm not even joking about this. They went to their like the person who complained about it the most, and then they made them the head of diversity. Well, I mean, just because you're aware of diversity issues, that doesn't mean you necessarily know how to run a diversity department. And you know, I think what I would say is I think that there's not enough of a recognition that it's a problem. No, I mean, I don't think that, I mean, I think if I have to be really honest about my company right now, which has actually done, I think, a phenomenal job with diversity, but it's something you can go and seek out if you want to, but it's not something we talk about on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it never comes up. So I think that one, there's not enough of a recognition that it's a problem. And then two, I think for whatever reason, you know, we're all kind of tired of having this conversation, aren't we? I mean, it just keeps coming up, and then there's these protests, and then people get shot, and then we think, oh, it's going to be better, and then it happens again. I mean, I think that there's kind of like diversity fatigue, which I think is too bad. I mean, that's why I asked that, you know, you just keep hammering away at the issues. I've been thinking about this issue really literally since I was a teenager, and I don't really know. I mean, if I just say, what is the cause? I can point to all these things that I know exist, but I don't know if I could point to one thing and say, this is why this happens. But just my kid, you know, he's got little friends. He's got friends that are boys, and he's got friends that are girls. And the boys are more interested in some stuff, and the girls are more interested in some stuff. And it seems to me it starts as young as that. I don't know. I think this country is just, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I really wish I did, but I don't.
Maybe it's more systemic. It's way deeper than finding just one issue.
I think for sure. I think it's something we have to attack on a lot of levels.
Well, it is 1 o'clock. Are there any final questions? Okay.
Well, good luck to you all. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about a wide range of topics today.
Dave, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Everybody, we will post the recording of this after Zoom processes it. We get a chance to download it. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.